Hi everybody, this is Andrea for the Learning Bear podcast, and today we're doing something different than what I usually do, and it's a summer series for at-home science. I recently found out that parents are looking for stuff to do with their kids during the summer, and they don't always qualify for like summer camps because they're going to be traveling a lot. So here we're going to provide some easy activities you can do with your kids that'll take a lot of time for them and give you a break. So let's check this one out. For starters, let's talk about supplies. You're going to need things that are hard to put back together again, and I'll talk to you more about this in a second, so hold your horses. One item per child that is breakable. I would suggest a clay pot, mostly because they're cheap and because that's what this activity prefers, but if you have something else that's breakable, like a incandescent light bulb or something like that, or old plates and cups that you don't use anymore and you're okay with losing them, that's fine too. Then you're going to need some markers, chalk, or paint, whatever craft supplies you have on hand. You do not need to go out and buy new craft supplies. You're going to need glue, and I would recommend the most basic liquid Elmer's glue, whatever, Rose Art brand, washable glue that's liquid. Glue sticks are not going to work, and you do not want to get messed up with crazy expensive glue or hot glue or super glue, just your basic glue, okay? I can't stress that enough. Then you're going to need a plastic bag, a paper plate or two, some safety goggles, which are kind of optional, but I would recommend having them if you can. And then another optional supply is a hard-boiled egg. So I know this doesn't make any sense right now, but we'll get there. Go ahead and pause if you need to so you can write these things down. So here's the setup. Read your child or your children Humpty Dumpty, the poem, while holding on to this hard-boiled egg. Again, this is optional. You could use an Easter, like the plastic Easter eggs if you want to. Anything like that's fine. When in the poem he falls, drop the egg, allowing it to crack. Here's the poem for you on the slide, but I'll read it. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty back together again. After you've dropped the egg, allow your students to look at the egg. They can hold it, etc. Could they put that egg back together? Would it be the same? Aside from the fact that it's hard-boiled and not a fresh egg anymore, could they make it the same egg again? I don't know. So now you're going to move into a discussion with your students, your children. What are some other things that cannot be put back together again, or at least not easily, okay? And you don't need to buy any of these things. You can probably come up with more things than is on this list. This is not an extensive list by any means. Just look around your house. What are some things that aren't the same again? Here's some options for you. Dish soap, toilet paper, wrapping paper, coffee grounds and tea bags, eggs, toothpaste, Band-Aids, used envelopes, tires, dead batteries. You could toast a piece of bread. Would it ever become soft again? You know, have that discussion. You could talk about a bag of chips that are all crunched up. I mean, there's like a million different things you do, and they're all in your house. You do not need to buy anything for this part. And this, again, is the part on the supply side that said things that are hard to put together again. This is what I'm talking about. Next, you're going to connect what you just talked about as far as Humpty Dumpty goes and connect it to nature. And basically, when an ecosystem is ruined, either by natural forces or human forces, it's very, very difficult for those ecosystems to return to their former glory. Everything might look the same on the surface, but if parts are missing or relationships are lost between animals, the ecosystem will not work effectively. So a really good example of this would be like when they reintroduce a species that was extirpated in an area. It comes in and it doesn't have those established relationships, or there's not a predator there for them anymore, and so it's really going to affect how well that species is reintroduced. It's going to affect the ecosystem around it. So again, even though it might look the same on the surface, if something is missing, even just some seemingly small part, the ecosystem just won't work as effectively. So now talk to your students about what are some natural events that can destroy an ecosystem. This is kind of following up on that connection. that we just talked about. So hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, landslides, all of those things and more are natural events that can destroy an ecosystem. It can wipe out a whole population that's already in decline. It can change food and water availabilities. It's a lot of bad things can happen when those natural events happen. If you've ever been caught in a hurricane like I have, it messes things up for a long, long time. I mean, we're coming up on almost a year since a hurricane hit where I live, and there's still houses that don't have roofs. And that's a human thing. I can't even imagine what's going on in nature. Then talk to your kids about what are some human events that destroy an ecosystem. And I am sure that they're going to bring up pollution and littering right off the bat because that's a really popular answer. And they're not wrong. Definitely talk to them about that. But there are more things than just those things that are a problem. Mining, draining, damming, construction, logging, parts of the food industry are really bad for an ecosystem. So there's a lot of opportunities for discussion there. So now this is a really great part for you as a parent because it's a huge time suck. Okay, you're going to see what I mean by that in just a second. Give your children a clay pot or whatever item it is that you're giving them that is breakable. And if you have a whole brood of kids, maybe you have them work in groups or you can have them work individually, whatever works best in your circumstance. Ask them to draw or create a beautiful nature scene like an ocean or some mountains or a park on their pot. Okay, this is where you need your crafting supplies like chalk and paint and markers. If you do decide to use markers, I would test them out on the pot ahead of time because sometimes like the really cheap markers, they don't work on pots. So I would lean towards painting or chalk. Give them all the time that they want to work on the pot or that you want, whatever you want. You could turn this into a 2-day activity if you wanted to. Have them decorate the pot one day and do the second part coming up the next day. You could totally do that. So then at this point, because you have allowed them so much time to work on their clay pot, they're going to become very attached to their new work of art. And that's exactly what you want to happen for a couple of reasons, and it'll become more clear as we proceed. But you want them to really appreciate what they've done to their pot, okay? It's really important. And in my experience, when I've done this with kids, I've done it several times, whether you give them 15 minutes to work on it or 40 minutes to work on it, they instantaneously become attached to it. So don't worry if you're not giving them enough time. It'll happen on its own very easily. Now, after that time suck, okay, now I use time suck in a good way this time. You give them all that time to work on their pots, and so then you can do the dishes or make dinner or laundry, whatever it is that you need to do to get done. You can do that while your kids are coloring their pot and are completely engrossed in that task. Now here comes the fun part, and this is the part that you could do on the second day if you wanted to. Depends on how much time you have available. Looking at their clay pots, ask them if they think it would break if they dropped it on the ground, like Humpty Dumpty did. This is a really good discussion for them. You could take a poll if you have a lot of kids. It's up to you. Now you're going to take that pot. This would be great if it's the next day because it'll be dry. Put the pot inside of a bag, like a grocery sack. Can be paper or plastic, doesn't matter. And then here's a recommendation. You should probably wear safety goggles when you do this or shield your eyes in some way. It's also very, very recommended that you, the adult, drop the pot just because you don't want your kids getting hurt. Also, if you're a parent, you know that once they get into breaking something, they're going to really enjoy it, and you don't want this pot smashed to a bajillion pieces. You just want it broke a little bit. So just remember, you should do the breaking. So you're going to drop the pot while it's inside that bag onto a hard surface. Sidewalks are really great for this. Garage floors that are concrete, perfect. You definitely need a hard surface. Carpeted areas are not going to be effective. So I don't recommend doing it that way. I would do it outside anyways if you can, because the pot will be broken outside and you won't have all those little pieces in your house. So that's also great. Now, one last note before we move on. You may have to drop the pot more than once. It depends on the size. I've gotten the cute little 50-cent pots from Michael's that are really, really small. You probably only need to drop that maybe once or twice because there's just not as much surface area to crack. It's not as sturdy. But the big, like pint-sized ones, you're going to need to drop it a few times. You don't want it smashed into tiny little pieces. You want some big chunky breaks, and you'll see why in the next part. But it's okay if you have to drop it more than once, okay? Just remember that. Okay, so you broke their pot. Depending on the age of your kid, they probably weren't expecting you to do that. Some of them might have, and they were totally okay with it. But in general, they're not prepared for you to break their pot, especially because they've become so attached to it and they've spent so much time working on it. But here's another opportunity for a great time suck. Challenge your students, your children, to put the pot back together. You will roll out the contents of the bag onto a paper plate. I would recommend having another paper plate that they can assemble the pot on. Provide them with glue, again, cheaper the better, liquid always, and some sort of work surface that they can get dirty. Picnic tables would be good. You can cover your table inside with newspaper so you can just peel it off and throw it in the recycle or burn it, whatever. Working outside is always a great option because the rain will wash the glue away. It is messy. Okay, this is definitely messy. You're going to want to give them some sort of space to work on that it's okay for it to become sticky. And again, this is why I stress using the cheap washable glue, because like if they're doing it on a cookie sheet, for example, you can just wash that. No big deal. If you get into like super glue and hot glue, it'll be permanent pretty much. So don't do that. Use cheap glue. Okay, please. Okay, so this last part will depend on your students. Some kids will want to work until they actually get the clay pot assembled. And again, that's fine because then that leaves you to do laundry or dishes or whatever it is you need to do. But they could also become frustrated. So you're going to have to kind of pay a little bit of attention. If you sense they're getting frustrated, then just shut it down. You don't want to go to the point that they're frustrated to tears because then they're not going to listen to this last part. So read your kids. You know your kids the best, so you're going to know whether they're actually going to try to finish this pot or if they're going to get frustrated in 10 minutes. So read your kids a little bit. So whenever they're done, whatever point it is that they're finished, discuss how hard it was to reassemble. Will the pot be the same? Can it hold a plant? Can it hold water? Could it survive another drop? Could it survive the weather? You know, if it's washable glue, it's probably not going to survive some rain. Okay. Compare this to nature and why we need to care for nature, or it will look like this silly pot that's now badly repaired. Okay. That's what it all comes back to. It's a really good metaphor. If we break an ecosystem, we can't just take some Elmer's glue and put it back together. We can't even take super glue and hot glue and put it back together. It's not that simple. There's a lot of complexities involved, and it's not something you can just slap a Band-Aid on to fix it. It's just not going to work. It requires systemic change. And that's the metaphor you're trying to get onto. You know, depending on your age of your kids, you're probably not going to go that deep into it. It'll be more like, let's pick up 3 pieces of trash every time we go for a walk. Or, you know, let's donate our allowance once a month to clean up the ocean or something. Okay. Small little changes tend to make the biggest change over time. So that's what this is about. And finally, if you want more activities or you have some questions about this, etc., I'm an open book. So ask me any questions you want. Contact me at thelearningbearpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe, share, and sponsor if you can. Again, shout out to Project Wet. This is their activity, Humpty Dumpty. I have manipulated it for how I like to teach it, so I didn't teach everything that's in that activity, but I taught a fair amount of it, so I will give credit where it's due. This is Project Wet's activity, Humpty Dumpty. Have a great day, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.